Madi, what strategies do you use to approach difficult conversations with empathy while still addressing the important issues?
Number one, bringing to the table some things that you've observed and, saying, this is what I'm seeing going on, and then giving them the floor to kind of explain, because maybe it's something that's going on in their personal life. Maybe they don't have the resources that they need, or they feel like they weren't fully trained, or whatever the situation is. If you leave that door open for them to communicate with you and for it to be a two-way street of going back and forth, I think that's the most important step and the first step to making sure that it's a comfortable conversation and that you can kind of gear it towards growth, development, and not this big scary thing of my boss is telling me that I'm about to get fired or, something like that.
As a manager or leader in the architecture, engineering, and construction industries, there is one thing that you're going to have to deal a lot with: difficult conversations, whether they're internal to your organization or external with clients, contractors, subconsultants, the public, and more. In today's episode, I'm thrilled to have with me Madi McIntyre-Holmes, Human Resources Coordinator at Menard USA. And Madi is going to take us through some strategies that we can use, some different actions we can take when dealing with difficult conversations. And not only that, but she's going to really give us a recipe for how to avoid or minimize these difficult conversations as a leader in our careers. All right, now I'd like to welcome our guest onto the show for today. Madi McIntyre-Holmes is the Human Resources Coordinator at Menard USA. Madi, welcome to the AEC Leadership Podcast.
Thanks so much for having me.
So, Madi, maybe just to get us started off, you can tell our listeners a little bit about yourself, kind of your career journey, and how you found your way into human resources.
Absolutely. So I think for me, it starts back whenever I was pursuing my undergraduate degree at Duquesne University. I was studying business management. So in the first couple of years, I took a couple of classes on organizational psychology, and then specifically human resources. And for me, something that has always stayed true across the years whenever I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my career, so I knew that I wanted to work with people. And so, as I was pursuing the business career and taking those classes, it just seemed like human resources was the best fit for me. So whenever it became time to start looking for internships, I found a position that was open with a company called Great Lakes Behavioral Research Institute. Essentially, they're a contractor for our local county Department of Human Services. And I ended up getting the internship, and it was a really great opportunity to kind of just be a sponge and soak up all of the knowledge in their 6-person human resources department. So from there, I actually continued my internship through my senior year of college, and they ended up offering me a full-time position after school. So that was kind of the entry into my HR career. I worked there for about 3 years until I found myself at Menard.
That's awesome. Internships are always very beneficial in helping someone starting their career learn about different fields and give you opportunities to meet people, build relationships. And like you said, kind of being a sponge and like soaking up all the knowledge that you can about a new field that you're trying to get into. So it's great to hear that. So we're going to talk a little bit today about difficult conversations, which is something that someone in HR often has to deal with, whether you're dealing directly with someone or you're talking to a supervisor about maybe conversations that they might be having with other team members. So what are some of the things that you do to help your team shift their mindset from dreading these difficult conversations to kind of seeing them as opportunities for, professional development, employee development?
Yeah. So I think the first step to that is, as a human resources professional, just building a really strong foundational relationship with your managers. I think that's the first step in general, because whenever they're coming to you, typically they're coming to you with a problem. So having that baseline comfort level is super important. But then from there, I think my approach for having difficult conversations is, number one, always making sure that the supervisor is able to kind of put themselves in that other employee's shoes or kind of empathize with them on a different level. So more specifically, if you or I were having some performance issues with our job, or our boss wasn't pleased with our work output, I'm sure what we would expect or what we would want is for someone to bring that to our attention so that we're able to correct it, right? So it seems super simple, like on the, like at face value, I suppose, but sometimes just saying those words kind of puts the managers a little bit more at ease. And they're like, okay, it doesn't have to be this big, scary conversation. You're shifting it from, these are all the things that you're doing wrong, and this is what I need to see you do in the future, to, look, I'm really invested in you and your career growth within the company. And in order for this to work, we need to address some things. So let's talk about what's going on and then how we can take that next step to make sure that you're performing where you need to be.
That's great. And I like what you really said there when you started off, which is just building good relationships between team members and their managers and their supervisors. I think that's kind of a baseline that could help you avoid a lot of these issues going forward. And I know at EMI, we put a big focus on kind of the culture and the relationship building between different team members. And I would, recommend to those listeners out there, if you find yourself in management or leadership positions, the more energy and effort you put into those relationships, it can help you to avoid some of the issues that happen, because that'll help you communicate better, right? And like Maddie's saying, set some expectations around the job, the position, which can kind of alleviate some of these other issues. So, Maddie, what strategies do you use to approach difficult conversations with empathy while still addressing the important issues?
Absolutely. So I think that the first step to that is, number one, bringing to the table some things that you've observed and, saying, this is what I'm seeing going on, and then giving them the floor to kind of explain, because maybe it's something that's going on in their personal life. Maybe they don't have the resources that they need, or they feel like they weren't fully trained, or whatever the situation is. If you leave that door open for them to communicate with you and for it to be a two-way street of going back and forth, I think that's the most important step, and the first step to making sure that it's a comfortable conversation and that you can kind of gear it towards growth development and not this big scary thing of, my boss is telling me that I'm about to get fired, or, something like that. So I think that's the first step is, opening the door with asking them what's going on, or if they're kind of seeing some of the things that you've picked up on as well. But then always circling back at the end to, I understand that maybe you have some personal things going on, or I understand that if you feel like you don't have the training or resources that you need, we're going to work to address this. But now that I've brought it to your attention, it's something that we really need to see progress on, and we really need to see change. So this is we're in this together sort of situation, and we need to work to make sure that we're both getting you to the end. You're not in this alone. I'm going to help hold you accountable, but we really need to see some tangible changes moving forward so that we're able to continue to foster your growth and success.
That's great. Yeah, I really like the idea of leading with, how are you doing? What's going on, to get their perspective a little bit. This way, we're not jumping to conclusions or making assumptions about why they're having maybe the issue that they're having, which I think is really important. And I think that we do tend to jump to conclusions sometimes, right? You're working on a project, you want to get it done, and this person is not performing. And so you're going to kind of jump down their throat a little bit and make some assumptions about what's going on with them. So I really like that approach. But at the end of the day, like you said, you do have to address the situation, right? You have to figure out what's going on, because even if someone has something going on personally, but they can't do their job, then they still can't do their job, right? So you have to kind of understand why and how we're going to help and how we're ultimately going to resolve this and deliver to our clients, because that's how our companies, of course, succeed and thrive. So I think that that's a good approach, remembering that we still do need to figure out a way to get results. So, Maddie, how do you strike a balance between adhering to company policies and fostering kind of personalized, empathetic communication in leadership roles? And this is a question that I always like to ask HR professionals, because, we do have policies in place for a reason and we need to adhere to them. But at the same time, we're trying to accomplish certain things and we're trying to be empathetic and all wrap all these things together. So what advice could you share on that?
For sure. Well, I think the first step to that, or the first piece, is on the HR end. So making sure that you're building policies and, writing them out so that we're, of course, compliant, because that's like the number one concern, but also making sure that we allow ourselves for some flexibility, because when you're dealing with people, when you're running a business, there are going to be so many different situations that you find yourself in or that are brought up to you. I mean, I feel like I could write a book. I'm still pretty early on in my career. So you're doing yourself no favors by putting in super strict policies or rules that are black and white. So making sure that you're building and writing those policies so that there is a little bit of flexibility and you're allowed to, or it enables you to keep the human part in human resources, because our people are not our number one asset at the end of the day. And if they feel like we're just kind of throwing a book at them anytime something goes wrong, that's no way to run a business. That's no way to foster a culture that is conducive to productivity at the end of the day. So like I said, first and foremost, making sure that those policies that you're writing are flexible and kind of lend to creating a people-first environment. But then whenever you are building these relationships and you are showing people that you're understanding and you're giving them the opportunity to kind of explain their side of things and open up about things that may be hindering their performance or contributing to these problems that they're having at work, then they're building up that trust and they know that you have a baseline level of empathy and you're looking out for them in their best interest, right? So once that groundwork is already built, they have that trust with you so that whenever it does come the time where you need to put your foot down, you need to be a little bit more stern, they understand that it's in their best interest. And even if they don't see it at the time, they're at least able to look back and reflect and be like, you know what? My boss has been really understanding with me. They've listened to me, listened to my concerns. But, most people at the end of the day realize that this is a business and sometimes we need to make tough decisions.
Yeah, I really think that this is an important point. I think that a lot of firms, of course, put HR policies in place for legal purposes to protect themselves, to make sure things are in writing for employees, which all makes sense. But if it gets to the point where it becomes prohibitive and almost robotic, right, where you can't be engaging with people. Like you said, your people are very important. You got to be able to talk to them and be flexible. Different people have different situations, right? I mean, if we haven't learned that over the last 5 years, I don't know what we've learned. So I think, creating your policies in a way that allows some flexibility for different people, different situations, different perspectives. I mean, look, now we have hybrid working environments, which we didn't have 5 years ago, really at this level. So I think that's a really good point. And for those of you out there listening, obviously, if you work in a smaller organization, it's probably a little bit easier to kind of, craft your policies a certain way. If you work for a larger organization, there may be some more standards in place and changing them might take some more time. But I think it's certainly something to pay attention to, because if you kind of make it so prohibitive that it's hard to really adapt to people and connect with people and speak to their specific situation, it can be challenging in the workforce today because it's very competitive and they can go somewhere else where they can find that more of that personal touch, if you will.
Exactly.
So, Madi, from an HR perspective, how can leaders help their teams grow and succeed, particularly in the AEC industry that we work in right now that's very competitive, very fast moving? How can leaders help their teams grow?
Well, I mean, just what this entire episode is about today, not shying away from those difficult conversations, right? Because when you have a great team and things are going well and, things are trending upward, then, that's all great. That's not where the concerns come in. But whenever things start to go south, or maybe there's a team member that's not pulling all of their weight, or they're having some personality conflicts with other people on the team, that's where we make the difference. That's where it's either, okay, this person, we can have a conversation with this person, explain what we need to see, and they can make that change. Or we're going to let this fester and maybe let them go at the end of it, or even worse, kind of let it go on and on without it being addressed. So I think that's the most important thing. And then, of course, like I mentioned earlier, making sure that you're building those relationships with your team members and asking some of the obvious questions. Whenever you're sitting down for your check-ins or maybe your performance review time, making sure you're actually asking that person, like, hey, how do you feel things are going on our team? What are some of the skills that you feel like maybe aren't being utilized in your current position that we could make use of? Where do you see yourself in 3 years? What do you want? Because some team members, if they're more social or maybe just have a different comfort level with you, they'll come to you and they'll approach you with these things on their own. But some who are maybe a little bit more quiet, or maybe they're earlier in their career, newer in the organization, they're not going to have that same comfort level approaching you first. So even if you're the most approachable person on the planet, you feel like you have a great relationship with these people, as a supervisor, it's your responsibility to making sure that you're asking questions.
That's great. And I guess kind of the running theme of this episode is really, to me, is you need to put a lot of effort and energy into the relationships with the people that you're leading, the people that you're managing, because a lot of the stuff that we're talking about, the issues or the challenges, are going to stem when you don't have a great relationship, or can happen if you don't have a great relationship. Or even if you do have a great relationship and something does happen, you'll be able to maybe address it a little bit easier because of the relationship that you have with that person. So if you're a manager, leader out there, aspiring manager or leader, I think that's one of the key things you should be thinking about, is how you can further develop the relationships with your team members. That's going to help with a lot of the issues we're talking about. All right. So this question I have to ask you, what advice do you have for managers when an employment relationship, when it just isn't working out? Because that's going to happen from time to time too.
Absolutely. I always say, and it's maybe a little bit cheesy, but employment relationships are just like any other relationships. And once they've run their course, sometimes, you need to part ways for both the growth of the company and the growth of the other person. So this can sometimes be really hard for managers, especially when they feel like they put a lot of resources into this person and, it's taken a lot of time, and maybe they're even afraid of what's out there to replace them. I think just the most important thing to kind of lean back on is that you did everything that you could as a manager. If you're having these conversations along the way, you're being clear about the expectations, and you're making yourself available as a resource and making sure that other person, has all of the resources available to them, then at the end of the day, you did everything that you could. And sometimes it just doesn't work out. And not every loss is necessarily a loss. And that goes for both sides.
That's great. Yeah. And I think that you're right. I mean, it's the relationship. Sometimes it doesn't work out, depending on, just like in real life, when you have relationships at home or, friends or whatever, they don't work out. Actually, there was a pretty comprehensive study, and I know article published in the last few years by Gallup, all around this manager-employee relationship. I can't recall the name of it now, but it talked a lot about how, typically people, when they resign, they're not resigning because they don't like the company, and they're resigning because of their relationship with their manager in most cases, right? And that's why that relationship is worth really developing. And if it's just not working out, then probably something needs to be done. You need to move on, because it's only going to cause issues, which could cause their performance and could affect other people on the team as well, if you're not working through that.
For sure.
So, Madi, many engineers and technical professionals, they're going to rise up to leadership positions throughout the course of their career. What advice do you have for them to improve their communication and people management skills to be able to lead effectively, since these aren't skills that they're typically taught in school?
Mm-hmm. Well, number one is ask for training. Go to your supervisor, ask if there's any internal programs at your organization that are around, management skills, communication skills, things like that. Because like you said, when you're promoted usually because you're really good at this one thing, this one technical thing. But now you have to become good at something that's totally separate from that, which is managing people. And the people business is very tricky. So don't be afraid of asking for help. Don't be afraid of asking for additional training, because there are so many programs that are out there. And even if your organization doesn't have one currently up and running, there's a ton of one-off courses that you can attend. And it's not going to be like you walk out of there and you know how to manage any type of personality, but you at least have a solid baseline and a good understanding of how to start to approach these conversations. And then also make sure that you're reaching out to your human resources department. You don't need to go to them whenever it's time to put someone on a performance improvement plan or whenever it's time to write someone up. You can use them as a resource to help kind of coach and guide you through these conversations with your people. And that's what they're there for. They're for a resource to everyone, but especially the managers, to make sure that we're having these conversations in a productive manner.
Yeah, that's great advice. And the one thing that I would say to all of you listening is that some companies just don't have access to those types of training programs, but there's still resources out there that you can build up yourself. Books, videos on YouTube. There's a million videos you can watch on how to develop your communication skills or speaking skills. There's groups like Toastmasters International where you can become a better public speaker. I know when I was coming up as an engineer, my company didn't really offer a lot of those types of training. So I did find stuff on my own. And if you really want to develop yourself, you can do that as well. And so that's one of the reasons I started EMI, to start offering these things, because I felt like there was a little bit of a gap in the industry. So, so if you can't get access to them that easily through your company, there are probably other outlets that you can find in today's world where there's information everywhere that you can definitely develop your soft skills, your interpersonal skills, your leadership skills. And those are the skills that I believe really can carry you in your career.
Absolutely.
So, Madi, we talked about policies and procedures. So as a leader, how can we kind of ensure that the policies and procedures are followed, but not just followed, also kind of understood and embraced by our team members, so that they don't just say, oh, we got to check the box on the manual type of thing?
Yeah. So for me, whenever I'm introducing a new policy or explaining a role or a procedure to someone, I'm very intentional about explaining the reasoning why. We can't do this, but here's why, and here's an alternative, right? So I think that's the first step. And if you as a manager aren't sure why we're doing that or why we take that approach, then reach out to someone who can help explain it to you. Because, if you are able to provide that reasoning why, it's going to, number one, click and make sense for the person a lot of the times. And if not, then they understand that it's not just something that we decided to put in place and never reviewed because, no one made a fuss about it. So making sure they understand why or the reasonings behind it is really going to help them both understand and then number two, get buy-in for that particular procedure or policy.
That's great. I love that, right? Really telling people the purpose behind something. I think a good analogy to that is really what we do in engineering. If we're working on a roadway design and I'm asking someone to do a roadway design, I'm probably going to explain to them, but by doing this design, we're going to actually be saving lives because we're going to be reducing accidents this year by a couple of hundred less car accidents, right? And people are much more engaged when they understand the purpose behind something, why we're doing it, not just what it is or telling them to do something. So I think that can really work well, again, with policies and procedures, because there often are deeper reasonings that we're having these things in place. And explaining that, taking the time to explain that, can really be a game changer. All right, Madi, so what final piece of advice can you share with AEC professionals looking to kind of shift their mindset and transform difficult conversations into opportunities for leadership and also for team growth?
Again, just don't be intimidated by it. When you hear the word difficult or performance problems or anything like that, it's easy to kind of get caught up in all of the ways that it can go wrong. But if you're very intentional about your messaging, you're giving that person the opportunity to explain their end of things, and you're treating it as a conversation versus you just talking at someone, it's going to go so much smoother than you could imagine. And it's going to be a lot easier to get a positive outcome from that versus someone just shutting down and continuing that same behavior that's causing a problem for you. So don't shy away from it. Don't look at it as a negative thing. Really make sure that deep down, your approach to this is to help this person and to help get them from point A to point B versus this is just something that I have to do because we're, looking to move on from this person, or I just have to check this box and get this done with because my boss told me I have to.
Yeah, that's great. I think that generally speaking, the idea of leaning into something or leaning into difficult conversations or difficult situations like this is something that really great leaders do. They kind of lean into situations like that instead of avoiding them and trying to run away from them. And so I think this is a good example here. And if you want to be proactive, then you can really focus on building relationships with your team members like we've been talking about today ahead of time. So when you do get to a difficult conversation or something happens, yes, you can lean into that conversation, but you're also going to have hopefully such a good relationship and rapport with that team member. You can work with them to really resolve it in a positive way and make it a learning experience and move on to the next thing. And really, I think a big takeaway for me from the conversation with Madi here is it's really about mindsets. And if your mindset is difficult conversations are going to be difficult, then they're going to be difficult. But if your mindset is that difficult conversations present an opportunity for our team to get stronger, our relationship to get stronger, then you're going to have an opportunity. I think that speaks worlds. And I think that that's something that's important throughout your career and throughout life in terms of your mindset and how you approach every day. So once again, Madi, I want to thank you so much for spending some time with us. Again, Madi McIntyre-Holmes is the Human Resources Coordinator at Menard USA, and we really appreciate a couple of minutes here on the podcast today.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Madi. This literally is one of the biggest challenges for a leader in architecture, engineering, and construction, right? We deal with a lot of difficult conversations, and if you can employ some of the strategies that she shared, you're going to be better. And if you can just build better relationships overall, you're going to minimize these difficult conversations. If you enjoyed the video, please subscribe to our channel here. We put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.